Well, for the folks on the line that don't know Ben, I'll introduce myself. For those of you that don't know me, and I'll introduce Ben. My name is John Harris. I'm a managing partner with Fortune Management. Been with Fortune for about 10 years now. The lady that recruited me over to Fortune is actually my sister. She's been with Fortune for a little over 20 years. I was having a lot of success in a career previous to. I was progressing pretty quickly through the levels of management at FedEx. A lot of good experience there, a lot of good training, and thought that would translate well. And so here I am 10 years later. And we own multiple franchises across the Southeast. A couple of my business partners are also on the call this evening, Anya and Liz. Collectively, we work with practices around the Southeast on practice development, leadership development, team development, communication, practice growth, profitability, and all those kinds of things. And then I partner with folks like the gentleman that we are chatting with this evening, Ben Bush. And Ben, I'm going to read your bio really quick.
Great.
So everybody's got a really good idea of who they're dealing with. And then let me pull that up. Okay, Lee is planning on joining. Liz just texted me, so we're just waiting for him to chime in. And so I'll introduce him whenever he joins. But Ben is actually my financial planner, so I can personally vouch for this guy's expertise and knowledge. He's helped me make some really good decisions, especially just in the last 6 to 12 months with my home refinance and home equity loan and freeing up cash so that I can make some investments in some other areas. And so wouldn't have known to do a lot of the stuff that I've done in the last several years if it weren't for him. But Ben helps entrepreneurs and professionals create a new understanding of how finances work and then employs those strategies designed to help clients to reach their true wealth potential. By actively listening to clients, Ben develops a genuine understanding of what they want to achieve. A key business strategist and inquisitive, critical thinking financial advisor, Ben works to provide clients tailored, thoughtful, and objective advice so that they can pursue their passions, goals, and dreams. Ben's firm work ethic and genuine desire to help have provided him opportunities to improve the lives of numerous clients. He works with a lot of our clients across the country, not just here in the Southeast, and is a wealth of knowledge and experience in the financial space. And so very pleased to have him with us this evening. Got a lot of questions for you. For me personally, questions that get bounced off of me, and I'll be the first person to tell somebody that says, hey, I know enough to get you in trouble. So let's talk to somebody that's going to keep you out of trouble and keep you informed at the same time.
It goes right back at you when I get questions about how to manage a practice, create team culture. It's been a really amazing run over the last 12 years to build and grow with Fortune, and honestly, being able to experience so much that Fortune has to offer as an advisor. But I always say I've gotten years worth of exceptional education by going through the training programs and learning so much about dental teams and systems. So great to be here. Happy to be on with you, John. Really appreciate what you guys have been building down there in the Southeast. Again, being a part of this for 12 years, I've watched a lot of that growth happen and how dynamic you and Reagan are. So this is awesome. Really happy to be here.
Great. And coincidentally, because of COVID, we had some restrictions in Tennessee and restrictions in Georgia, and we're delivering a 2-day financial planning and wealth development seminar. Wealth Mastery is one of our flagship programs in Fortune. We're delivering that virtually here from my home studio. And so I didn't realize that I had scheduled this event to coincide with that event, but it just happened to work out. And I was like, well, this will be really good, because we had a lot of questions come in, through the chat today. Had several teams on today. Great experience. Everything's going really well. So I've really enjoyed. I think CE's kind of taken this turn anyway. A lot of continuing education, I think, is going virtual. Helps reduce costs. And if you think about it, with where technology is, it makes sense that, the continuing education format evolve as well, right? So we've been delivering those training universities for over 30 years in the same format, right? We're in person. All of our teams are there. And it's great. That experience is probably the optimum experience to attend in person and have a live experience. But I think there is something to be said about having a virtual option available. so that people that may have some travel restrictions or limitations still have the opportunity, to get the education, interaction, that kind of stuff. And the Zoom platform is really good for that because it's interactive, it's engaging, and you can have a very similar experience this way. So yeah, man, I'm excited about this evening. Excited to get some questions answered. Did
you guys schedule that? Was that co-done with some of the Philly teams? I see that you guys were your session 5, your wealth mastery. It was done right. I see that in the marketing. That's the other thing brought is the ability to work with other teams around the country. Right.
Well, we are not doing it in conjunction with Philly. This is the Atlanta session 4 or session 5.
Got it.
Essentially what we're doing. So Philly may be doing one too.
Well, we've seen some of that happen too, where teams have been able to get larger numbers and have some real exercises. So I agree. I can't wait to be back in person myself. I feed off energy and of other people, and I love being in those rooms. But I've also been able to learn quite a bit in this format.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because with this kind of format, you can get bigger numbers, you can get more people at one time. And I think the more people that attend that event, the better that event is because you get more questions coming into the chat, more interaction and all that kind of stuff. Speaking of, since we are doing this Zoom meeting, one thing you'll notice on the bottom panel of your Zoom screen, you'll see a couple of things. You'll see one option that says raise hand. So if you've got any questions that you want to bounce off myself or Lee when he joins or Ben, please click that raise hand button so we know that your hand's up and we'll be sure to turn to you and get your question answered. Feel free to type any questions into the chat, which is also on that bottom panel. And then I'm not sure, this is Q&A. I'm not sure what the Q&A is for. No open questions, only hosts and panelists can see the questions. Oh, maybe that's something that I put in there. But anyway, so good. Want to make sure you guys get as much as you can out of this event this evening. And the major topics that we're here to cover, not opposed to going a little bit broader than this, but the 7 primary points we want to cover this evening are obviously establishing financial security. That's what session 5 has been about. It's what it was about today. It's what we'll be talking about tomorrow. Accelerating practice growth. Want to give you some, just more or less, just some guidance in that area. If you're on this call, you're probably a progressive and proactive type individual. So you're already seeking out information to help grow your practice. So I just want to kind of share with you some of the best practices that I see, the things that I work really, really well with practices that I work with, and give you a couple of case studies of what it looks like to actually implement some of these things and what the potential results could be. I want to talk about cost containment and profitability. Obviously, if we want to, if you're not funding your financial plan now, one of two things has to happen for you to start to do that. You're either going to have to eliminate some costs to free up capital, or you're going to have to make more, right? It's one of those two things. So we want to talk about both of those, right? So if we can, ideally, we don't have to reduce our existing cost of living and quality of life. We can get creative, get efficient, and accelerate practice growth, free up profitability that way, and use that money to fund our plan rather than selling our house and selling our car and our boat and, reducing our lifestyle, right? So that would be ideal. Some tax and accounting strategies. Obviously, we've got, some employee related tax exemptions and tax credits with respect to quarantine and PPP. You've got PPP forgiveness. I've got some clients that are holding off on that right now because they want to see what the, what's the word I'm looking for? What the stipulations are with the second round of the PPP. Some clients have already filed for forgiveness who aren't eligible for the second round. What the second round looks like, and what we should expect from that, what we need to be aware of. Stimulus package, obviously, some goods, bads, and uglies in that thing, I think. What 2021 taxes, we should expect there, like in terms of like capital gains tax. If you're preparing to sell your practice, that's something you really need to be aware of. If you're preparing to sell your home, there are some stipulations there we want you to be aware of. Obviously, big reason why we've got Ben here is on the financial security side and creating multi-generational wealth, which sounds like a very fancy word. You think multi-generational wealth and you're like, oh, well, that's for like really rich people. It's really not. it's really, that is a very, very attainable goal for the vast majority of people out there. It just takes a plan. You've got to have a plan in place, and you've got to execute on that plan consistently. And that's what Ben helps us do. Also want to touch on transitions, buying, selling, merging practices. Obviously, there's a lot there in terms of moving parts, what to look for, what to stay away from. How do you know if you're in position to sell? What decisions you can make to prepare yourself for sale and maximize your return on that acquisition. And then lastly, structuring win-win solutions. Like, how can we arrange this deal in a way that maximizes, the benefits for me, mitigates the risks for me, and also maximizes your earnings if you're selling the practice to me or vice versa. And so good. So it sounds like a mouthful, but we're going to get through all of it. Okay. And so we'll start with the establishing financial security piece. Ben, and I'll really let you run with that one, man, because I spent all day today with Reagan delivering session 5, and we talked a lot about stocks and bonds and, cutting the waste and, cost containment and freeing up capital so that we could fund our plan, and the importance of leveraging compounded interest, which I think that's a concept that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but I know a lot of people are, and I would imagine the people on this call are your more affluent, individuals who are financially, either financially educated or they are in the process of educating themselves. So we'll assume, for the sake of that everybody on this call understands the impact of compounded interest and how that works and why we want to be able to leverage that. But in terms of, you look at a dentist, your typical dentist, you're in an extraordinary position, probably one of the best positions of anybody to generate multi-generational wealth, right? You've got the ability to, buy an asset that's not only going to provide, the financial resources to fund your quality of life now, your lifestyle now, but fund a vehicle for compounded growth that's going to provide for your retirement, at some point down the road, whenever you choose to retire. You can also leverage real estate in that process, and it puts you in a very, very good position towards the end of your career to have some options available to you. Whether you choose to sell the practice, retain the real estate, rent the real estate, whether you choose to own or finance some of that and leverage interest. I think one of the things that I find, well, actually, I won't even go into that. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. So with that said, Ben, with whether you're a dentist, a practicing associate, or maybe even this might even apply to a lot of employees, in dental practices, what advice or guidance would you give them in terms of just creating financial security for themselves? How would you define financial security? Is it 2 months, 3 months, 6 months of living expenses? What does that look like? What protections do they need to have in place, like term or whole life disability? What guidance would you give them there?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, because financial security, I think, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What I think Fortune has done really well in their wealth mastery sessions is define these different steps along the way, with financial security being one of them and first. Now, what's really, I think, odd is most people unintentionally sort of approach finances in a backwards way, right? It's not because they want to, it's because nobody lays out the roadmap. But when we talk to clients and ask, I think, reasonable questions, like I work with a lot of early and mid-career dental entrepreneurs, right? They may have young children. They may have just bought their first house, may have just bought their first practice. And I say to them, hey, what is the likelihood that you're going to retire next year? And they go, it's 0, unless if I hit the lottery or if I bought GameStop 2 weeks ago and sold it yesterday. Or, what is the likelihood that your 6-year-old child's going to go to college next year? And it's 0. And I think my 6-year-old daughter's a genius, and I'm waiting for the letter from Stanford, and it's not coming, right? What is the likelihood that you're going to go buy your beach house next month? And the answer again is 0. So it's like all these things, and we go, well, what are the first things that everybody wants to talk to us about, right? When they meet with a financial advisor, which I think is a pretty broad term in itself, people go, hey, I want to make sure I'm funding my retirement. I want to make sure my 401k is juiced and going, and I want to make sure that I'm funding some type of college education for my kids. Can help me do that? And I go, we can. But then we go, what is the likelihood that anything in your life, anything, could occur in the next 2 or 3 days that could drastically change the direction of your ability to create this financial freedom and independence down the road? Anything. And the answer is higher than zero, right? So when we have that discussion, it seems logical that we go, well, maybe the first thing we should do is start to mitigate those risks, which is pretty far reaching. Now, when I say that, a lot of times you mentioned a couple of insurances. So then when I ask the question, well, what do you think of when I talk uncommon or unexpected life events? People go, I could die, I can get disabled. And I go, yes, and we should manage those things. But this is a very far-reaching conversation, right? So another piece of financial security is just starting to save, right? It's creating a mechanism in which you can build up and save. So when life turns left and you want to go right, that it doesn't shut you down financially. The first thing is building up that foundation. So it is creating a strong protection portfolio. That protection portfolio includes not only the insurances you mentioned, it includes the liability protections that should be in place. That's home and auto and umbrella if it's necessary. It's, see Lee jumping on here.
Yeah.
It's creating legal documents, making sure that you have protected yourself in the space of having strong legal documents. It is, your health insurance conversation. And then it's also just building up a pocket of capital that if something occurs, it's sitting there. Safe, reliable capital, right? So when you talk about financial security, it's just positioning yourself that you have the confidence that moving forward, life's sort of what ifs, when they do occur, don't turn into disaster in terms of finances. Because I'll tell you, as you move forward throughout time, one big side effect that we see is if we're not properly protected, and somebody said this to me once, and I repeat it all the time, of the millions of things in life that have a 1 in a million chance of happening to you, one of them's going to, right? It's sort of how life works. Mm-hmm. And so we don't know what those millions of things are. We just want to build the bubble or build the moat around the castle. So when they do happen, you can deal with that on its face, but also not have the stress of what is my financial life going to look like, which is all too common, like the number 2 thought for a lot of people when mm-hmm. these things sort of happen. Like, oh, what's the financial impact? It was when COVID started. One of the first things is, okay, well, how am I going to be positioned if I don't have work for the next 6 months, mm-hmm. right? That may have been the same for a lot of people here. So that's my entree to financial security. That sort of first step is the first step in any financial strategy. And any licensed financial professional, for us, we hold several licenses, security licenses, as well as some designations. That's always what is taught, right? It is the right thing to do is make sure you start with that step, and then we can move into more of those growth-oriented conversations, right? And we can do that with confidence because we've taken care of our what ifs. When we pause and say hi to Lee and welcome in it, if you want.
Hey guys.
Hey man,
sorry, I was late in a real estate closing and had a little bit of a mix-up in time too. So I apologize.
I know if there's a mix-up in time, that's on me, man.
No, it's on the calendar at the right time. I was just away from the office this afternoon at that closing, and we were negotiating some stuff, and it got in my mind that it was at 7, so I apologize. So.
I got you. No worries at all, man. We got you, and that's the most important thing. Let me do a brief introduction real quick so people know who we're talking about or talking to this evening. Aside from being an avid duck hunter and a dead shot from a coffin blind, Lee has been practicing as a CPA, providing tax and accounting services for clients for over 20 years. Prior to starting his own firm, Lee worked with Southern Company and its subsidiaries as tax and accounting research specialist. Then he developed many skills required to negotiate the ever-changing landscape of tax and accounting issues while helping people develop the company's accounting policies and dealing with tax-related regulatory agencies. This experience taught him how to develop policies and practices that would apply to any business, and he learned the negotiation skills required to work with outside agencies that impact businesses on an everyday basis. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but anytime I'm doing one of these and somebody's reading my bio, it always makes me uncomfortable.
It does. It sounds a whole lot more impressive than it is sometimes.
Right.
I think that's the point.
Yeah, right. And so bottom line is I try to surround myself with folks like Lee and Ben because they have a very unique area of specialty and a very unique expertise in areas that I think are of utmost importance. Like, you don't want to trust me with telling you what to do to avoid, to eliminate and minimize your tax liability. You don't want to listen to me about where you need to be investing your money in the stock market and all that kind of stuff. I like I said earlier, I can tell you enough to get you in trouble, but we don't want to get in trouble in those areas. So I have my area of expertise. I know what that is. And then I know what I don't know. And the beautiful thing is I've got people like Ben and Lee who know what I don't know. And so this is essentially what I would call like my board of directors. And so any client that enlists me or engages me or one of my partners in this business, we have people like Ben and Lee that we also want to have available. Doesn't mean you've got to use them. It just means, hey, if you need a good dental accountant, I know the guy. If you need a good wealth development strategist, I know the guy, right? I've got a guy that I know, I trust, I've got experience with, and I would absolutely recommend them to anybody. So these guys are a reflection of me, and I'm very protective of my reputation. So I surround myself with people who are going to make me look better than I actually am. So that's why I got these guys on the call this evening. And so Lee, Ben was just touching on financial security. And I think a part of that obviously is there's going to be an insurance component, right? We need to make sure that we've got protections in place, whether that be whole life or disability or term and all that kind of stuff, especially in like professional services like we're in. Like if I got in a car accident tomorrow and I was in a coma and I couldn't talk to anybody, the revenue stream that I generate from my business shuts down, right? Unless I can hopefully transition some of that over to some of our partners within my franchises. A dentist, on the other hand, might be a little bit more difficult to find a dentist to slide in there and take over, right? So you need to make sure you've got some protections in place to help provide for your practice, your team, your family, sure, and all those kinds of things. What guidance, Lee, would you give everyone just from a security standpoint, just to ensure that I'm financially secure?
Well, personally, obviously, I mean, the first thing is to be sure that they have adequate disability insurance to take care of that immediate need, both short-term and long-term, if that unfortunately becomes the case. And that's key. I think secondarily, and we've seen this a few times, the unfortunate really happens and that accident turns into a fatality. And that makes the practice very hard to sell, particularly if it's a sole owner and you're looking out for your family. Hopefully you've got appropriate life insurance to back that lifestyle up for your family and take care of them and the spouse to whatever age that needs to happen. But then knowing the value of your practice too, because that is a very significant asset for all of us. What we've built, what we can sell that for, as a part of all of us as professional providers, what we can do and realize additional income for our estate or whatever's out there. So working with good teams of people that can guide you and help you and be in the right place if that unthinkable thing happens, to assist your spouse, your family, whoever's in control of that situation, to make sure that the right decisions are made and timely made. I've heard numbers that, if you're in that situation, that the value of the practice goes down by about 50% every month that it's not sold. I don't know how quickly that can happen. I know that this year I've known of a couple of practices where the owners have passed away with COVID issues, and I've heard that that's been pretty close to the case. So knowing the value of your practice, always having it lean and clean and ready to go on a moment's notice. Sometimes we get a little comfortable and we're just thinking life's going to run on along. And even at a 40-year-old, I mean, you got to be prepared for those things. Maybe even more so at 40 years old than you do at 60 years old. Hopefully at 60 years old, you're a little bit better prepared to weather those storms. So all of that's important to know and understand.
Yeah. And having a backup plan. The gentleman that I bought my first Fortune franchise from was a Fortune client who unfortunately got cancer and went through chemo and lost some of the feeling in his hand. And so he was like, okay, well, I've got a lot of experience with Fortune, so let me try that. And so he bought a franchise and he worked, did the franchise thing for a while, the coaching thing for a while, decided he wanted to go do something else. and then contacted me about buying his franchise. But that was kind of his succession plan. And we have a lot of clients across the country who practiced dentistry for a while, and then they decide, hey, I need something that's a little bit less physically demanding on my body because my body can only take this for so long. I need some kind of succession plan, right? And I think that's great. We've got a lot of hygienists that eventually put their handpiece down and become hygiene mastery coaches, or fortune coaches. So I think having a backup plan too. And you're absolutely right. I've seen a lot of fire sale situations over the last probably 12 to 24 months. There's one that I'm aware of right now that I'm actively pursuing, trying to find a buyer for them, where the owner doctor got sick or passed away. I don't know I can't remember the specific details of that one. And then if it's in a position where I've got a client who's actively, pursuing merger acquisition opportunities or second or third location opportunities, and I have several of those, then we got a home run, right? Because my client's going to get a deal on the practice. They've got a seller, they've got a buyer, and everybody wins. But I think you got to have your network. I would say I think your network of professionals in the industry, whether that's a Shine rep or a Patterson rep or an IT specialist or something like that knows other people in the industry, so that you can get word of mouth going really quick. Yeah. Right? Because if you don't have that word of mouth component working to your advantage, you're limited on how you're gonna, find buyers. And unfortunately, a lot of those things go to DSOs. Not unfortunately, but I guess that's an option, right? I don't think most private dentists desire, a private corporate, liquidation. I think most private dentists would prefer sell their practice to a private dentist. So yeah.
Oftentimes the DSOs, everybody kind of thinks sometimes that's a panacea situation. But generally the DSO wants somebody that's going to be around too. And so that can affect the price.
Right.
If the dentist is not able to perform the services anymore, that can be a little devastating to the family, from what they expect.
Often a contingency of the deal, meaning a DSO might claw back revenue, but there are a number of backup plans too that we've seen or helped put in place. I think dental practices are starting slowly to transition differently than they have for the past 30 to 40 years in certain circumstances, for a number of reasons, which I know John will probably get into a little later. But we've seen, people creating opportunities for younger associate dentists earlier maybe than they would have in the past, locking them in with different types of financial arrangements, and sometimes offering sweetheart deals on a purchase price, but saying, at a later date. I just did an ortho out on Long Island who's, it's a massive practice, but the associate signing on, and if the owner dies in the next 7 years, he's agreed to buy 100% of the practice at that time. So he's sort of locked in that contingency, creating a buy-sell arrangement, but giving a little bit of a discount on that 7-year reach out, right? So there's a lot of arrangements to be made, and I think you got to think outside the box, not just from these death and disability conversations, but for new opportunities or the changing world of dentistry.
Yeah, and I think that what you just said, Ben, is from what I see and have run across. I'm in Atlanta, and we have a huge market in Atlanta for dentists, and it's pretty easy to move a practice in Atlanta. But you go 60 miles north or south, and you get into a more rural area. Sometimes those practices are pretty hard to move. So that kind of affiliation with somebody, having that backup plan in that way is probably extremely more important than it would be in at least in the metropolitan area.
Yeah, that's a good point, because just because you need a buyer doesn't mean you're going to be able to find one.
That's right. We know of practices in 60 to 80 miles outside of Atlanta that have been for sale for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
and they're great practices, but a person with a young family typically doesn't want to go to a lot of these very rural locations.
Which is amazing, because I would advise associates the exact opposite. I think there's more money to be made, outside the perimeter, like Johns Creek or Lilburn, or, I think there's more opportunity to produce, and I think there's more opportunity to earn. There's less competition. the people that are working in Atlanta live in Lilburn, so.
Oh yeah. And those metropolitan area practices, I mean, we don't see any difficulty in getting those sold. I mean, there's usually 3 or 4 people looking at them very quickly. But if you go from Atlanta to Milledgeville or Atlanta to Carrollton, some of those places, it starts getting a little bit more difficult to move them.
Yeah. I've got a 2 location doctor in Carrollton right now who we're having a difficulty finding an associate. So, I mean, and another one in Columbus who's having a difficult time finding an associate. So if I tried to find an associate in Dunwoody, I'd have 5 of them knocking on my door. Buckhead, there'd be 10 of them knocking on my door.
Roswell, Marietta, that's just the way it is.
Yep. Okay, good. Let's see here. Moving on. What would you guys say? I've got some thoughts here that I can share, but before I jump into those, basically just an overview. But in terms of accelerating practice growth, Ben, I know you work with a lot of dentists. Lee, I know you work with a lot of dentists. What kind of strategies, tactics, game plans do you see them implementing on a large scale that you find tend to contribute most to their practice growth?
Lee, I'll defer to you to start.
Okay. Well, the more services that they can add, we're seeing a lot more, particularly with the younger groups of dentists, tackling more services, adding maybe some non-traditional services, so forth. But just not referring out a lot of stuff that maybe the older guy does. When we look at a practice and the guy's in his 60s or older, in some cases, they're not doing a lot of things that the younger guy has some training and is willing to go get additional training. So I think the expansion of services to the present base is always something that's very good. And then, we've seen some really good marketing plans. It doesn't always work for everybody. We've seen some club memberships that have both exploded practices and some that were a waste of time. And I can't put my finger on why that's the case necessarily, but we've seen success with that. And just, to what you guys do at Fortune, John, I don't know that I've shared this story with you, but we had a situation where we had a grandson that needed to go to a dentist, and he was going to a pediatric dentist, and the pediatric dentist didn't want to do what needed to be done and said he needed to go to someone else. And we took him to one of your clients, who is a client of ours as well. And my wife actually was off that day and took him, and she was just extremely impressed by the operation of the office, how well that whole process went with a new patient. And I think that personal touch, that connection, and investing in your people and having them well trained returns huge dividends.
Yeah.
And I know that training came from you guys.
I'm gonna run through a series of bullet points here in just a second after Ben discloses his thoughts, and you basically just said every one of them.
Well, right. So if I'm going to answer this question, I'm going to tell you first and foremost, everything I know about this, I learned from Fortune. So I'm not going to try and steal the thunder, right? And you talk about there's 3 ways to actually grow a practice organically to build revenues. We just hit a big one, which is increase services. 2 is increase prices. 3 is increase patients, right? I think what Fortune focuses on culture and that exactly that experience is going to help a lot there in the organic growth. But I think one thing that I would say that might be a little different than what you're going to go to, Josh, and I learned from you on this one, is figuring out what you are great at and knowing what you may not be great at and not trying to be mediocre at something you're not great at. Like Lee mentioned marketing. I see a lot of practices struggling because they're trying to do their own marketing the way somebody else does. They may see mailers working. They may see a social media platform working. They may see that, and it's not clicking for them, but it's because they're not the same person, because they don't have the same mind, mentality, behavior that other practice owner does. And so for me, it's, we're using this a lot in our world. It's who, not how, right? If I'm not great at marketing, I'm not saying, how do I become a great marketer? I'm going, who's a great marketer, and get that person on my team. Right? If I'm not great at referral programs, I go, who's got great referral programs? So those are some thoughts that I have, but primarily, if I have a practice that says I want to grow, the first recommendation I say is, where are you? Who's the fortune coach in your area? Mm. And then we can talk about inorganic growth, which we do a lot in our world, right? Is that merger acquisition type stuff, adding another revenue stream if you don't own the real estate, becoming a landlord. So those are some other things that we can incorporate to increase revenues.
Right. Well, guys, I appreciate the plugs. I want to disclose this is not a fortune sales pitch. This is not the intention of this event.
No, but it works. It's what the reality
is. It just happens to be true most of the time.
Yeah. If you want to have a conversation with one of our people, we're more than happy to walk through stuff with you. But yeah, so you touched on every one of them. I tell you what I find is more often than not when I'm having a conversation with a doctor and they're talking about, I want to grow this much this year, the very first thing they turn to is new patients. And I'm like, well, how do you know you need new patients? How many active patients do you have? Well, what kind of revenue are you doing? Oh, we did $1 million last year. How many active patients do you have? We have 2,850. You don't need more new patients. You got almost 3,000 active patients. You don't need more new patients. It's not a new patient problem, right? And so if you want the biggest bang for your buck, I want to make sure I touch on these and I don't forget any of them. But the number one area of opportunity that I see that's available right now and has been available since probably June is merger acquisition. I mean, there is a huge shakeup. I think the new patient opportunity right now is abundant because if you got a mason jar full of ants and that they're just chilling and then you shake the jar up, they're going to scatter. Right. Well, that's what happened with the dental industry, right? Over the last 6 months is somebody shook up the jar. And so if you think at any given point in time, 10 to 15% of your patients are looking for somewhere else to go, they just need a reason. COVID was a reason, right? It was an unprecedented amount of change. People are avoidant of change. And so because we're already in all this change, now's as good a time as any, to go ahead and change the practice that I go to. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong, right? It may just be a mismatch in personality, right? Or somebody that's a little bit closer to home. So there's the new patient volume that I've seen in a lot of my practices has increased significantly without them doing anything from a marketing standpoint. Okay. But I see most people turn to the marketing front like that's going to fix these problems. And I would tell you that merger acquisition, the per patient acquisition cost when you do a merger acquisition is so much lower than the per patient acquisition cost when you pay money to attract new patients. It's crazy. It makes no sense, to pump a bunch of money in marketing. And so I would look, first thing I'd probably do is focus on my retention mechanism. Am I retaining patients in my practice or are they leaving? Right. Because if my retention is only like 30% and I just spent $10,000 on a marketing campaign, only 30% of those patients are going to stick. The other 600 are going, 700 are just going to go right through, right? Only 30% of that dentistry is going to get done and they're going to go right through. So I want to button up my internal operation first, make sure my customer service is good, communication's good, new patient flow's good, schedule's good, treatment presentation skills are good. And then put as many new patients in that thing as you possibly can. Merger acquisition's first place that I would look. When you buy and merge a practice, you eliminate all the fixed costs. The only costs that come over are, your variable costs. So you're going to drop, 65% of every dollar that you just spend on every dollar that practice generates. If it's $1 million practice, 650,000 of it's falling to the bottom line. 600,000 of it's falling to the bottom line, depending on how profitable it is, right? So it's much more profitable. Plus, you've got an abundance of new patients. And more often than not, what you find is these practices that have a little bit older, little bit more, we'll call it experienced, not older, more mature dentist, at the helm. A lot of times what we find is there's, I think maybe just their priorities changed a little bit later in their career. The financial obligations, the financial pressures are a lot lower now because their kids are out of college, their house is paid off. They don't really need to produce. And so there's a lot of dentistry in that patient base that hasn't been done. And so as the younger, progressive, proactive dentist, when you buy it, your crown to filling ratio is a lot higher, right? You're more proactive, you're more progressive, you're going to be more productive per patient. So the practice that you just paid $1 million for, you're probably going to do 1.5 with it, the same patient base. Okay. So you don't need new patients, right? So merger acquisition, I think, is the biggest opportunity to accelerate practice growth. Reactivation, obviously, every practice that comes through, every patient that comes through your practice, some are going to stick, and some are going to, keep going. And so having a proactive reactivation process or mechanism in place to get continuously focus on getting those patients back in, getting that unscheduled treatment back on the schedule is very, very effective in terms of practice acceleration. Lee mentioned a broad procedure mix, and I'm curious what you guys think about this one. I have a theory. I don't know if it's true, like your feedback, but more and more dentists, we call it SOI, right? Like ROI, sleep ortho and implants, right? 45% of your patients are candidates for implants. 33% of your patients are candidates for ortho, either for alignment or preventative reasons, cosmetic or preventative reasons. 33% of your patients are candidates for sleep. Those are very profitable procedures, and they're fairly easy to incorporate, fairly straightforward, right? You're not getting into, probably not getting into bone grafting. Even if you're just doing mandibular, you're not doing any maxillary, you're not doing any anterior, even if you're just doing like the easy implants, that's still a significant impact. I mean, if you do the math on that thing, you're talking millions of dollars of revenue that's available through those three procedures, which is why so many people are focusing on them. Plus, they're very profitable procedures. So you're not doing a lot of volume to make a lot of money, right? So you can certainly accelerate financial security in your financial plan that way. And that may even be if you're not interested in doing implants or ortho or third molars or some of that kind of stuff, maybe even bringing a specialist in, 3 days a month, 4 days a month, and having them operate as an independent contractor, and just pay them a percentage or whatever that looks like. We can talk about that. But that would be an option. I'm curious if you guys, I think more and more practices are going this way. And I'm curious if you guys are anticipating the same trend. I think 10, 15 years from now, it may not even take that long. I don't think there are going to be brick and mortar specialty practices. I think that the oral surgeons and the endodontists and the orthodontists are going to say, hey, why am I paying $8,000 a month for a lease and paying all this equipment and technology and all this kind of stuff when every general dentist around here has a CT now? They have a staff, they have operatories, they have chairs, they've got a surgical suite, and I can just go work out of their office 4 days a month, work out of this office 4 days a month, work out of that office 4 days a month. There's my 16 days. Or another office 4 days a month. There's my 16 days. And I have eliminated the overhead, the stress, and a lot of the liability. So that's where medicine went, right? They're consolidating, right? Rather than you having 5 GPs beside each other, they all banded together and says, rather than all of us paying for a CT machine, why don't we pay for one and all 5 of us use it? Rather than all 5 of us having a staff, why don't we all share the same staff? Right. And so if you want to know where dentistry is going, look at medical. Because the smaller verticals or healthcare are just following the biggest vertical. I mean, dentistry is what a $50 billion industry. Medical's like 450. So all the money goes into medical first, and then it kind of trickles down to dentistry. Would you guys, maybe I'm completely off, but would you guys agree that we're going more towards super GP, we're going more towards multi-specialty, and that the environment's going to look more, in other words, 10 years from now, you're either going to be an owner or an associate. There's going to be fewer owners, right? Fewer people in ownership positions. You're going to have more multi-provider practices, and you're going to have more multi-specialty practices and fewer podiatrists, right?
I think the writing's on the wall in that direction, driven by several forces. I think the fact that most of the larger corporate dental entities provide all services under one roof is going to drive that from a matter of convenience from a consumer standpoint. Mm-hmm. Right? From a consumer standpoint, once they start to get used to, I can go somewhere and get everything done under one roof, they're going to like that feel that, we talk about what a consumer wants. They want affordability, they want convenience, and they want, right, good work. So I think that's driving it. I do think that the whole world of ortho is sort of unique because there's a lot of you saw that Dentsply Sirona just acquired another practice, a lot of groups coming in, but I think there's value in actual clinical orthodontics. And so I think that practice merging in the pediatric ortho world is going to sort of be that one-off, right? Pediatric ortho seems to be this really solid partnership. And for those who can arrange that, A lot of potential there. Where I see the brick and mortar falling out for sure is we don't do a lot of brick. Like, I don't know if you guys see it. I don't see a lot of startup endo or perio right now, period. I see some transition, but I don't see a lot of people starting up in that world trying to create a new brick and mortar. That's already a world where you're seeing a lot of PAP tools will travel, right?
Definitely, we see that here with endo. We've seen a number of endos that are just basically, as John said, they're a traveling guy. They're in a practice. They have a pretty regular schedule, and they schedule around that. They have a day in one office, 2 days maybe in another office, and another day in another office. And quite honestly, again, to John's point, they have no overhead. They're getting paid on production, and they have zero overhead to have to worry about. So I definitely have seen that big trend in endo, and I think the other specialties will certainly soon begin to follow that. And then you get into what's technology going to do to all of those specialties as well, and that's going to change. What's that mean? I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but it's going to happen. Technology is going to change a lot of different things over the next few years.
Yeah, that's another thing I think with technology too, but with that transition, with that consolidation of the variety of different specialties within dentistry, when you take components out of the workflow, you speed up the workflow and therefore speed up the cash flow, right? Like if we could, like, that's why we've got, 3D printing implant guides and immediate placement. And now it's not a 3-4 appointment thing. It's not a 2 appointment crown. It's a 1 appointment crown. I don't get paid in 2 weeks. I get paid now. Right. And it speeds up cash flow. When you speed up cash flow, you speed up profitability, because now I'm getting paid this month, the month that I incurred the expenses, not the following month. So there's not a lag time. Right. And then the same thing is true for, technology, like with Celea. If you've got a patient who's got, needs fillings in 3 different quadrants, rather than that being 3 different appointments over the next 6 to 8 weeks, and smaller appointments, less efficient appointments, right? Because you're still turning over the room, you're still paying the assistant, still demand the same amount of time, but 3 times rather than 1 time. And if you do all those in 1 appointment, that's equivalent to a crown, right? And so it speeds up cash flow. It also speeds up treatment acceptance, because if it's a 3 appointment process is a bigger commitment for me to bite off than a 1 appointment process. Right now, I got to get 3 shots. And for somebody who has dental anxiety, I don't like the idea of 3 shots as much as I like the idea of 1, right? Or no shot, right? So I think those kinds of technologies are certainly appealing to the patient's clinical values, which are convenience, affordability, and comfort, right? Keeping me comfortable, good customer service, patient experience, the technology that helps to appeal to those needs as well.
John, the only thing I'd add, though, is there's pros and cons to going the way of the medical, right? So I think private practice dentists want to be cautious about, what is going on in medicine or what has happened over the last 30 years. Because while medicine has progressed in that way, you're not seeing a lot of value in medical practices anymore, right? Most of them are being acquired by hospitals, but even if you are a private practice general physician, they close up the door and they walk away with 0.
Exactly right.
They walk away with 0. And we work a lot in healthcare outside of dentistry as well. And so I think we want to finesse that conversation to create those economies of scale, to have those groups, but you don't want to go the way of the dodo bird.
Well, I think physicians do a really, really poor job of retention. Just from my personal experience, like when you walk out of you go into a physician's office for a checkup or like blood work or a physical, when you leave, they don't schedule you. They wait for you to call them back, right? Where's the goodwill, right? So I think medical could have taken one out of the dental book, in terms of that component of their business, but definitely understand what you're saying. And that's why we advocate for the preservation of private practice. We want our doctors to be entrepreneurs. The financial opportunity for them is much better. The work environment for their employees is much better. The financial opportunity for their employees is much better, with profit sharing and benefits and those kinds of things. So it's better for everybody. It's a win-win.
Yep.
Okay, good. And then obviously your fee schedule and renegotiating insurance reimbursements is a really big component to practice growth. The one of the biggest areas of opportunity I see is the mismanagement of hygiene capacity. I've seen, just from this one variable, I've seen practices go from $30,000 a month to $90,000 a month in 6 months, just because hygiene was mismanaged, right? They needed 3 hygienists. They only had 1, and they couldn't get new patients or SRP on their schedule. They couldn't, if a patient fell off the schedule, they couldn't get them back in.
Yep.
So it was a poorly managed hygiene schedule. I've got a practice right now that a client just bought for $1 million. It's going to do $2 million this year. Because the third day we were in there, when we vetted it, we looked at which practice to buy, and we looked at where the opportunities were. We knew it needed 2 hygienists. And so if you double the hygiene, you double the restorative dentistry that's getting diagnosed on hygiene, right? And you've just doubled the practice.
I'm a 1/3, 2/3 ratio. It's not even double. It's more, right?
Yeah, more. So conservatively. So the opportunities there are extraordinary. So I saw a post in a dental forum the other day that says, should I start up or should I buy a practice? An existing practice. And without hesitation, I said, buy the right practice, right? Just don't buy a practice, buy the right one, right? And so it depends on what you're looking for. If you're just looking for cash flow, you're going to pay more for that, but it's spinning off cash, right? But if you're looking for return on investment, look for a dentist who is not prioritizing the clinical side of the practice as much. He's living more on hygiene revenue. He's watching a lot of dentistry. He's just not as proactive as he used to be. He's golfing more, spending more time at grandkids karate tournaments. Y'all understand what I'm saying? And then there are variables to look at. Crown to filling ratio is one of them that helps you understand what the proactivity level is of his clinical approach. And practices that have mismanaged hygiene schedules or aren't billing certain procedures, and then buy the right practice and then grow that thing. The same client that bought the $1 million practice that's going to do $2 million this year, bought her first practice 2 years ago, and it bought it for, I think it was doing a little less than $1 million. I think doing a little less than $1 million at the time. Bought that practice, and it did $2.4 million in the middle of a pandemic, 18 months later, 2 years later. So, I mean, that's the kind of growth that's there if you just find the right practice. Right. And so, I would say in terms of just practice growth, those, in my opinion, that's the low hanging fruit, and then I've got new patients at the very end, so there are scenarios where you've done a lot of the restorative dentistry on your existing patient base and you're not adding procedures, right? There's only so much crown and bridge to be done on 1,000 patients, right? And if you've done a lot of that crown and bridge, you're really dependent on cosmetic dentistry or elective dentistry, or you're really dependent on new patients. So, that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Let's see here. What about cost containment and profitability? We touched on several items already, and I do want to come back to the, what we should expect now that we've got Lee, what to expect from a tax standpoint and with 2021 coming around. So I'll run through some thoughts here real quick and let you guys chime in. Profitability is all about fee schedule and efficiency. I think insurance serves a purpose for a reason. I think the only reason a practice would want to leverage dental insurance is to accelerate new patients, right? But that's marketing.
Yeah.
It's all it is a marketing tool. So you are paying for it. It's expensive, but it's effective, right? So if you've only got 600 active patients and you're trying to get your practice to 1.5 million, you're going to have to accelerate your new patient flow. Or if you're trying to bring on an associate because you need more work-life balance, you're going to have to accelerate new patient flow. Insurance is a good way to do that. It costs money, but there's nobody says you got to be in network with them forever. The practice that was the doctor that bought the $1 million to $2.4 million practice, she wants a fee for service practice, right? She wants it to be fee for service. And I encouraged her to buy this practice because it had a lot of growth potential. She's still in network with all the same insurance plans, but we're just now maximizing the real estate. And when we start, she's renting the space, but the lease is extraordinarily low. And she's just now maxing it out. So now we're about to start backing out of insurance plans. And so we can continue to grow without seeing any more patients and just controlling demand. So it's strategic, right? You don't just go in network and out of network just on a whim, right? Um, and so profitability is all about fee schedule, insurance renegotiation. It's all about efficiency, how efficiently you schedule. It's a lot about your procedure mix and the profitability of the procedures that you provide, and ultimately getting paid for what you do. I see a lot of perio codes not getting billed because patients complain because it was expensive, or balance billing, which I certainly don't recommend. We need to get paid when we do the service because that's when you incur the cost. And accounts receivable management. We've got a lot of people that are stuffing statements, or they've got some kind of a clearinghouse that sends statements for them. That just slows. I mean, when you're managing AR that way, it just slows down the cash flow. Like it's taken 30, 60 days for me to get paid. Right. So we want to speed that up. So rather than stuffing an envelope and paying $12, which is the estimated cost per statement that you send out, the average practice has $300 a month, right? Times $10, let's say, that's $3,000 a month. Right. So rather than pay $3,000 a month for statements, save that $3,000 a month, buy a $36,000 a year administrative assistant to free up some time, right? And send a text message with a link to a patient portal so they can pay it online. The penalty's the same. If you don't pay us, eventually it gets turned over to collection, so to speak. But we want to speed that process up. We don't want to drag it out longer than it has to be drug out, because technically, I'm willing to bet that virtually every practice out there has a financial policy that says payment is due on the day service is rendered, right? But we accept payment for up to 90 to 120 days or a year later, right? So we need to enforce the policy that we have in place. If I go to Walmart, I can't check out and say, well, actually, I take that back. This did happen to me at Chick-fil-A one time. Went through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. I said, I forgot my card. And I did. I left my wallet at home. It was like 6 a.m. Left my wallet. They said, that's okay. No problem at all. We're just here. Just take it. And I felt so bad. I felt awful. And so I came back the next day and I paid them. I paid them for my meal the previous day, And so only Chick-fil-A does that, So just saying, Walmart does not. Ben, were you going to say something?
Well, no, I mean, just what you were referring to, which you're exactly right. You just brought up a who, not how conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right people. Cost containment is always a tricky thing, right? I do think that we see doctors sometimes overspending or getting out over their skis. Unfortunately, around November, December, it seems to coincide right when the dental supply companies are offering great deals on new technology, and when they think that they need a tax break. And Lee, I think you're going to be able to speak to this much more than I do.
Yeah.
So what they end up doing is creating too much cost on their books, because they try to use this 179 deduction, get some new equipment that they really didn't need. They didn't analyze how it was going to create an ROI in the practice. They just know they like using it. And then they end up with this financed piece of technology, which could be a great piece of technology. But after they take the 179 deduction, they don't get any more depreciation. And so they're paying it for a couple of years. And 2 years later, that's one of those things like, where do we get costs? Well, your debt is high, because you're out buying your procedures, right? You didn't really do the analysis. So I'm all in favor of technology, but I see that just coming out the tail end of the year, it's just top of mind, because we had those conversations at the end of the year. So I think first and foremost is, invest in the right things that are going to create the ROI, and you won't find yourself in that cash crunch many times, because often the first thing that people think they want to cut is the people engine. The easiest one to control is the people.
Yeah.
You go, well, I can cut the people. You go, but if you got a great team of great people, that's what's really driving the revenue.
Can't do more with less.
That's right. So that was what I was thinking, but I think Lee probably knows much more about this than I do.
Well, we struggle with that. It's always the temptation is, I'll go spend $140,000 and I'm going to create this tax savings. And that's very tempting. Unfortunately, what I've seen with some practices, and it's just the reality of it is they go out and buy the milling machine, they pay $140,000, and 6 months later, it's a pretty good boat anchor. And that's all it's getting used for.
Yep.
And so that's, there's some struggles with that. Be sure, and we always tell our clients, be sure it's something you really can use. You need to be efficient with it. It's a capital expenditure. Yes, you're going to get, on that $150,000 expenditure, you're going to save $60,000 in taxes, but you still spent $90,000 over and above that, so would you like to have that money in your pocket today?
Yeah.
So it's all about efficiency. And if it can create efficiency, and that's hard for any of us to measure how much a piece of technology is going to mean in a practice, because it's up to the individual practitioner to use it appropriately.
That's right.
And two guys can buy it, and one, it may be the best thing that's ever happened to that practice in the world. The other guy, again, it's a really nice boat anchor a few months down the road.
Yeah.
But understanding that and seeing that is hard to promote from our perspective to the dentist. We try to tell them, hey, yeah, if you're at the end of the year and you've got some investment that you're dead set that you're going to need to make, you need to do it, you need to upgrade, you got to do it. You don't really necessarily need to do it today, but in the next 30 to 60, maybe even as far as 90 days out, well, it might make sense to go ahead and do that.
Sure.
Beyond 90 days, I would say absolutely not. But because it's cash out the door, and that's what, it's easy. The equipment dealers offer the financing, and I get what they're doing, and it's a low rate, and it's a teaser deal, and their job is to move equipment, and we all get that and understand that. But being sure that you have the tools to use that and be able to make that a productive piece of your practice is extremely important.
Yeah, it's kind of like the wife that went shopping and came home to her husband and said, "Hey, honey, you're gonna be so proud of me. I got these $600 shoes for $300. I saved us $300." He said, "No, baby, you didn't. You spent $300."
Right. How come I'm $300 later?
So good deal on the profitability side. And then the few points I would add on cost containment, my thoughts are going to be untraditional. I'm not going to tell you to change suppliers. I'm not going to tell you to use cheaper gloves. I'm not going to tell you to get rid of EagleSoft to get Soft Dent, right? I don't believe you can shrink to grow. I think if things cost too much, you need to make more money. Like, things aren't expensive. You just don't make enough, right? So we got to figure out how to make more money. But on the cost containment side, I would say, and Lee touched on several of these items earlier, reduce turnover. That's huge. If you're constantly training new people and spending money on ads and trying to and paying to train them, turnover is one of the biggest costs that any business incurs.
Yeah.
So if you can reduce turnover, keep your people happy, it makes sense to add benefits and paid time off. I know it seems like a cost on the front end, but if it helps you retain your people for 10 years instead of 1 year, you saved so much more money than it cost you to match their 401k contribution.
Well, John, just on that, they did a study, and the study said it was about $50,000 for an associate, and about $25,000 for any other employee.
I saw that. Yeah.
Total cost of turnover. So but nobody quantifies that, right? Yeah. Lost productivity and headhunting costs, and then in getting them up to speed. So that's a huge.
Yeah. It's significant. Team training and development. Build your team. I had a client ask me one time at a training university, he said, "John, what if I spend all this money bringing my team through the training university and, paying for meals and paying for their time and travel and all this kind of stuff? What if I spend all this money and they leave?" And I said, "Doctor, what if you don't and they stay?" Right? So team training and development, very, very important. Hire the right people and then invest in their well-being and in their professional development. Your leadership development as a CEO is going to reduce costs. Being more effective and more efficient and more assertive, clarifying expectations, holding people accountable so that you get the performance out of your people that you need to get. Debt consolidation and restructure is a surface level conversation that's appropriate for a lot of people. And then ultimately profit sharing, incentivize your people financially to help you make the business more profitable, is a good cost containment strategy. So let's shift gears and go over to the next item. And this is really where Lee comes in. And this is where I hope to get a lot of questions answered this evening. And that is on tax and accounting strategies for 2021. A lot of stuff floating around out there. What, should I go ahead and apply for forgiveness, or should I wait to see if I'm eligible for the second round of PPP? How do I know if I'm eligible for the second round of PPP? Is it, the fiscal quarter, I have to be 25% or more down? Is it any 3-month period I have to be 25% or down? What do we need to know there, Lee?
Yeah, what I'm seeing, I've had that question actually brought to me today. And from what I'm understanding and what I'm seeing is it does need to be a physical quarter. You can't shift time periods to make it work. It has to be quarter to quarter. And seems pretty clear to me that that's the case. Certainly, if you meet that requirement and you're down 25%, that seems to be the big qualifier that everybody is jumping on. I do have a concern about the second round of PPP, and that is with the financial necessity statement. And, that is not really very clearly defined. It's almost like it's up to me to decide for me and John to decide for John and Ben to decide for Ben, and there's no guidance really to that impact. And I don't know what that means on, down the road. Does that mean you're going to wind up having to pay it back? Forgiveness seems pretty clear at this point in time. They had that in the first round initially, and they gave us a safe harbor on that. And, but is that going to happen on round two? We don't know right now. I think forgiveness is pretty reasonable to go ahead and apply for that at this point in time. I don't see any reason not to.
Even if you don't use it, just let it sit there so that you got the cash available?
For first round, I'm talking about going ahead and apply for forgiveness now.
Okay.
And doing that.
The one thing I've heard that might want to pause the forgiveness is if you haven't done the adjustment for the tax credits for last year, right? They make the tax credit. So that's the one thing I'm hearing is like, hey,
the employee retention credit is definitely an issue with that. But what I'm seeing, is quite honestly, with the practices that we work with, you can't, if you use the PPP money, you can't double dip and get the credit too with the same dollars.
That's right.
So where I see it at for my practices that I work with, I don't see very many people actually getting the retention credit as it's going to go. Now for 2021, that's a totally different animal.
And a lot more money.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that the answer for 2021 may be very different than what it's going to be for 2020.
Yeah. From what I understand on the employee retention, in 2020 it was mandatory. Like if an employee, because we've got some employees on this call, right? In 2020 it was mandatory. So if you contracted COVID and you were required to quarantine and you were out of work for let's say 14 days. Then the employers were required to pay that employee up to 2/3, no less than 2/3 of their normal take-home income during the period of time that they were quarantined. And then they got a tax credit on the amount of money that they paid that employee. In 2021, it's not mandatory, it's voluntary. And if you were an employee and you benefited during 2021 on that, you do not qualify. Like it's a total of, a total of 80 hours. Like you can't.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But with one little slight change to what you said, John, in 2020, if the employer used the PPP funds to make that payment, he can't get the retention credit also.
Right.
Now, if it's outside of his qualifying period, if he used the 8-week period and the 12th week out, he had someone out and he did that, he could use the retention credit for that because that's coming out of his pocket.
So you can't double.
So you got to be careful with, when the money was used and how it was used. And if you're using that qualifying payment to get to the forgiveness standard, you can't use the retention credit also. 2021, that's going to be a different situation altogether.
What about what should we expect in terms of capital gains taxes this year?
Well, what are we going to expect in terms of any tax changes this year? Is going
Tell the future for me.
I'm sorry?
Tell the future for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely, it looks like things are going to go up. That's been the mantra that is being told. When that's going to happen, we don't know. Historically, a new administration takes about a year to be able to, or 9 months, 10 months into the year, they may be able to introduce some legislation and get it passed. Usually that's going to be effective January 1st of the next year. With no barrier to passing these things, of control of all three branches of government, that may not be the case. And we've had one retroactive tax increase in our history. And so we don't know if that could be potentially there. Mm-hmm. The one thing that scares me about capital gains is the talk is that the rate will go to 28%. There's talk that if you make over $400,000, you'll have a 14 or 15% surtax for additional FICA taxes that go on top of that. And so capital gains could get very expensive if all of those things come into play. So we just don't know. I'm happy for the folks that were able to sell their practices before December 31st and get them closed, because I think this year could, and certainly potentially next year, could be a very different story with what happens there. Yeah.
Lee, there was, so go ahead, Ben.
I was going to ask, do you think that will change to some degree, both how practices are owned and transition, and two, how valuations will work out? I mean, all of a sudden, if the practice isn't going to net as much, people might change either the way they're valuing or not selling, right? I mean, there's going to be a consequence there. It's not just going to keep running the same if all of a sudden I'm at 35% instead of 20%.
Very definitely so. How that's going to work out and play out, I'm not sure. But I do know that I've had some conversations with some other people associated with the dental transition market, and they've seen a big uptick in some older guys saying, "I'm ready to get out. I want to do it now, and I want to do it quickly." And their expectation is that they can do it before anything happens with capital gains and some changes. And they're also, just transparently, they're a little concerned about how the new administration might impact the dental space from an insurance standpoint, from a government insurance or whatever may happen there as well.
Yeah, and when we get into buy, selling, and merging and that conversation, and also structuring win-win deals, we can talk about some strategies that, even though if capital gains go up, there are ways still to form that transaction in a way to avoid capital gains, right? So the capital gains you got to be creative, you got to be flexible, right? But there are ways around that. So
absolutely.
Yeah, but we're probably going to run out of time. We're not going to have time, I don't think, to get into the final two bullet points for this evening. But what we will do is we'll schedule another one of these. We'll call it Money Matters 2.0. And that will be the back half of this conversation, which is focused more on transitions, merger acquisition, win-win negotiation, associateships, and that kind of stuff. And then one question before we go into our final bullet point that will close out the evening is minimum wage is going up. I think $15. So there are dental assistants out there who would, by definition, are skilled labor, right? I realize that they say, well, $12 or whatever it is now isn't a living wage. And I don't want to offend anybody, but it's not supposed to be, right? That's entry level, non-skilled labor, minimum wage. It's minimum wage. And so it's not intended for you to live off of that. The goal is to, acquire some skill and level up and get a job that pays more per hour, et cetera. So with minimum wage going up, should we expect to see salaries across the board go up? They would almost have to.
Well, that's as minimum wage goes up, there will be less jobs available across the board, across all the economy. I've seen some articles in the last couple of weeks about certain industries looking at, automation, robotics, to take the place of some of the lower skill level jobs, as you said. How does that impact things? Certainly, you have a McDonald's franchise guy. His one of his most significant costs is his labor cost, and that gets very tough at $15 an hour when he's been used to paying $8 or $9 an hour. Mm-hmm. And that kind of is the market around Metro Atlanta, is about $9 or $10 an hour for a McDonald's worker. So you're talking about increasing that cost pretty significantly.
Yeah.
That's going to affect the overall economy. That's going to have to mean more people are going to have to make more. That $15 wage may not be equivalent to what the $12 wage was because of the cost increases that go on in other places. So it is a concern in Metro Atlanta. From a dental perspective, I don't see very many people making less than $15 an hour, even to start. So I don't see that as a direct impact on the dental space immediately, but I think that would force other wages to have to go up.
Yeah. And we're almost gonna, it's almost a certainty that we're going to have a pretty good amount of inflation with job costs going up, and we've seen all this money has been printed and free money given out. That's got to get paid back somehow, some way. Yeah. Right. And so inflation is probably the number one to recoup some of that. Good. So with that said, we mentioned at the beginning of the call that the two ways to make sure that you're funding your financial plan is to spend less and make more, right? One or the other, or both. Well, if we're going to have inflation, right? If we're going to have inflation, then the amount of money, that minimum wage goes up, or maybe your wage goes up, may be just enough to offset, inflation, the additional cost of living. So we're still break even there. So it looks like the strategy is going to be find ways to add more value, to generate more value and earn more. And so with that said, I want to talk to Ben about what would your guidance or recommendations be if I want to accelerate my financial plan and start the path towards building multi-generational wealth? What are the immediate opportunities for me, both if let's say I have a lot of discretionary income, or let's say my discretionary income is minimal? What guidance would you provide me there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we're nearing the end. So maybe this will be struck out at 2.0 too. It's pretty broad, right? But here's what I'll say in short. No matter where you're starting, it is taking incremental steps, making intentional moves in your life, right, to create the outcomes you want down the road. You mentioned compound interest is a really good model for this. Compound interest only works inside an extended time period, right? If you look at that curve, the curve happens, the real acceleration happens in the last 10 years on a 30-year curve. But what we get to is by creating a plan, by working with the board of directors, right? You need people that you can trust, that can guide you. And also, we want to find out what you want out of your life. You talked about multi-generational wealth. I got plenty of clients that go, I love my kids, but no, I want my last check to bounce to the attorney on the way to the grave. Thanks very much. I'll go ahead and spend my own money. I'm not interested in having my name on a building. So, it's an individual conversation, but it starts with intention. It also starts with the understanding that stocks and bonds and 401ks and 403bs and IRAs and money markets and life insurance and all these things that my industry sells are things that our clients have now and will have for the rest of their life, but they're inflation adjusted holding things. Right? For those people out there that have the mentality that they do want to create substantial wealth, that they'd like to see the acceleration of that plan, they got to figure out a way to invest in themselves, in their own business, in their own operating company. They got to figure out ways that they can invest in long-term income producing real estate when the opportunity is right, or figure out a way to finance deals in the merger acquisition space or otherwise, right? Those three areas are the only place that wealth has actually been created in this country for hundreds of years and will continue to do so, right? The positioning of these different products is meant to help fund those opportunities, in my mind, right? As an entrepreneur, for any entrepreneur that's on the Zoom or is looking for that kind of advice, I'd say the first dollar that you have to invest, you should figure out a way to invest it in yourself, because you're going to get a better ROI in that space, right? And then what we help you do is coordinate the plan. But inside the plan, it's the aggregation of marginal gains. It's identifying all the areas you can get a little bit better, and then you do all of those things and you get a little bit better. And the combination of all those things added up with time creates massive outcomes.
Yeah,
massive outcomes. So it's a short answer because I think we're short on time and we can go deeper dive.
Yeah.
But that's where I'd start. If you want to start with multi-generational wealth, figure out what you're passionate about, what you can do better than anybody else in the world. If that thing can generate revenue, right? And if you find the marriage of those things, you're passionate about it, you can do it better than anybody else in the world, and it creates revenue, figure out a way to invest in that. And I think you're going to find money follows you.
Yeah. And I will, just in closing, I'll say this with respect to what Ben just said. remember, time and interest, right? Those are two variables that are going to determine what the critical mass that you accumulate is. So if you have little discretionary income to invest, it's even more imperative for you to start now
Yes.
than when you start making more money, even if it's $5, if it's $10, because you're going to need more time. If the amount of money you can invest is smaller, you're going to need more time and a higher interest rate. Right. And so good. So we'll leave it with that, and then we'll pick up right there. We'll call it Money Matters 2.0. I like it. Just like PPP 2.0. And I'd love to have you two gentlemen join me again. We may bring in a transition specialist for maybe DDS match or something, since we'll be talking about associateships and transitions and that kind of stuff. And maybe some stuff has changed, in the landscape between now and then. But we'll try to get that on the schedule here in the next 30 to 60 days. And get the information out there for everybody to chime in. And hopefully the folks that joined us this evening will be able to join us then. And then thanks everybody thank you, Lee and Ben, for taking the time out of your schedule to have a conversation with us this evening.
Thanks for having
us. Yes, sir. And then I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their schedule to tune in this evening, and just keep an eye out for the information to come across for the next one. This event is being recorded. And so if you would like a copy of the recording, please just send me an email, and I'll be sure that you get a link to the recording. And with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. Ben, Lee, great to see you again. And I look forward to doing it again here soon.
Thanks, everybody. Pleasure.
Thanks a lot.